December 21st, 1978. Cindy Caswell was building a snowman in the backyard. Helping her were two 9-year-old twin brothers whose father had just been transferred to nearby Fort Leonard Wood. The boys were new to the neighborhood. Cindy always seemed to get along well with boys, especially ones that were a little older, unlike some of the other 7 and 8-year-old girls in her grade school class. "God damn it, that goddamn kid's pissed on the couch again," Boone Caswell yelled as he jumped up from where he'd just sat down. He ran through the kitchen and out the back door. Cindy heard him coming and cringed. "Please don't let him say anything," Cindy prayed. It was bad enough to have her father discipline her in front of her peers, without having them know exactly why he was so angry. Caswell grabbed his daughter by the arm and dragged her towards the house. Boone Caswell's head still hurt from the previous evening's excesses, and at 10:30 on a Friday morning he had intended to see what was on television. There wasn't any work to be had around the holidays, at least none that Caswell was willing to do. "Fucking brat," he screamed as he dragged his daughter in front of the couch. "How old are you going to get before you quit doing this?" He slapped Cindy hard across the face, then grabbed her by the hair and shoved her face down into the soiled cushion. "You like that smell?" he demanded. "That what you want the whole house to smell like, huh?" Caswell held his daughter's head in that position for about 10 seconds. Cindy held her breath and remained motionless. She had learned from experience that whenever she resisted, the punishment increased. Tears welled up in Cindy Caswell's eyes. "I wish he had punched me in the stomach instead of the face. Christmas is only 5 days away." There were several family gatherings, and the marks would definitely show. "Mom can use some of her makeup again," she told herself. "No one will know." But she knew that everyone would. The two newcomers to the neighborhood could hear the man yelling inside the house. His words were muffled, but there was no mistaking his rage. They ran out to Caswell's backyard and down the street. They had just learned what everyone in their new school would tell them as soon as the second semester started. Don't ever go to Cindy Caswell's house. Her dad's meaner than a snake and half crazy. That's why both her sisters lived with relatives, but not at home. February 17th, 1982. The so-called leaders in the White House have an agenda that can be summed up in one sentence. Enact spending cuts to abandon the Americans who most need our help, and precipitate a world war with a massive arms buildup. Fellow members of Congress, this is unconscionable. We must fight to ensure that our less fortunate citizens are not forced to starve to death because of callous disregard from some of our elected officials under the false promise of tax reform. We must safeguard our workers from the unfeeling devastation wreaked by the invisible hand the White House so unashamedly admires. We must stop provoking the leaders of the Soviet Union with name-calling and blatant aggression in the form of weapons buildup. These policies can only lead to a nuclear holocaust. Richard Gaines stopped to take a breath. His aides had advised him against the use of the word Holocaust, but he went with it anyway. It is time that we accept our roles as keeper of the public trust and enact legislation that meets human needs. For this reason, I am introducing House Bill Number. Congressman Gaines went on to explain the piece of legislation he had crafted to reverse the lower tax, free market, strong defense philosophy which President Reagan perpetually championed. Gaines's bill mandated additional outlays for government entitlement programs, an expanded welfare state, tariffs and other protectionist trade restrictions, and increased federal control over the American public. Every member of Congress who heard him describe it knew that Gaines also had higher taxes in mind, although he could not put that in the bill. Democrats held a clear majority in Congress, and most of the members of that august body would actually have liked Dick Gaines' bill to become law. The president's philosophy of self-determination held strong sway over the American public, however. Most members of Congress were loath to support a blatantly tax and spend measure in the current political climate. Gaines's proposal and others like it went nowhere. The problem would be made doubly vexing to the congressman by what soon began to happen around the globe. The results of low-tax, free market policies and a strong military were very discomforting to Richard Gaines and those who shared his beliefs. In the ensuing 6 years, the United States saw its own gross national product rise by an equal amount to the entire economy of Germany, the wealthiest nation in Europe. It was the largest peacetime expansion in living memory. The U.S. stock market tripled in value, the U.S. dollar showed record strength, and U.S. inflation fell to a 20-year low. The Berlin Wall was torn down, the Soviet Union collapsed, and socialist regimes in country after country toppled and were replaced by ones which embraced many of the free market principles which America had demonstrated. Richard Gaines and legislators with similar priorities had to wait until 1988 before they had a president to work with who was amenable to the idea of higher taxes, bigger government, and reduced individual freedom. The congressman's job were secure, however. Federal regulations gave congressional incumbents a tremendous advantage in the polls, so Richard Gaines and his friends in the House all collected substantial paychecks while they waited. April 10th, 1982. Hey, the gang's all here. Anything interesting arrived lately in the used section, Stoke? Henry Bowman had just walked into Kelly's Sporting Goods, seen that several of his friends were there, and hailed the store's resident gunsmith and double rifle expert. Stokely Meyer had many qualities that endeared him to Henry, 3 of which were that he had been to Africa, liked big rifles, and was the most creative swearer Henry had ever known. Only little stuff, .338s and smaller. Not even a decent medium bore in the rack. The teabaggers that come in here tend to be a bit recoil sensitive, shall we say, Stokely explained with an exaggerated stiff upper lip British accent. A muscular man with a mustache who was standing at the end of the pistol case laughed. Rufus Ingram was one of the few Americans who had served in Britain's Special Air Service, which was considered by many to be the finest of the world's Special Forces unit. He was standing next to Thomas J. Fleming. Henry walked over to greet his friends. Hey, Rufus, Tom. No Shanghai municipal police guns here either, Henry asked, looking down at the pistol display case. Rufus Ingram collected handguns that had been used by the famous department, which were marked with the Shanghai crest. Not today. Got another safari planned anytime soon? I wish. I did get a letter from the guy I hunted with, Ray Johnson, not too long ago. He's planning on moving to South Africa. As far as the economy goes, I gather that things have really gone to hell in Rhodesia. He said in his letter that they have a 17% national sales tax now. I hope he doesn't have much money there, Tom Fleming said. The new government in Zimbabwe prohibited its citizens from taking their money out of the country, which made its residents all the more eager to do so. No, Ray's no fool. When I paid him for my trip, I wired most of the money to an account in Luxembourg. I think he only keeps enough around to meet expenses. Probably sell off the Land Rovers to cover the last bills right before he cuts out. Speaking of Rhodesia, Rufus said, a Rhodesian friend of ours, Earl Taylor Edgerton, is coming to town in a few weeks to help us teach a class. Class? What kind? Henry asked. Executive protection and anti-terrorist measures, Rufus explained. I handle protection strategy, and Tom covers carry methods and legal issues. Earl's the explosives expert. It's on the weekend of the 27th. You ought to come. We'll get you a pass. I'm free. Good. I think you'll find Earl's presentation very interesting. Rufus and Tom shared a look. Henry said nothing. He knew he'd find out sooner or later why they were grinning at each other. Earl has had some interesting experiences, Tom explained. He was born in Rhodesia, and he was on the losing side during the recent overthrow. He's wanted in Zimbabwe for murder, violating whatever they call the Neutrality Act, and a few other things in conjunction with the war. He can't go back there. He hates socialist governments, Rufus added. Tom Fleming chuckled. Zimbabwe government still sends him his pension, though. They have to. It was part of the UN agreement for them to recognize the new regime. Tom Fleming looked at the book in his hand. And speaking of governments, have you seen a copy of this yet? Fleming held the soft-bound book out for his friend. What is it? Henry took the 6-inch by 9-inch booklet from the lawyer and looked at the cover. The Right to Keep and Bear Arms Report of the Subcommittee on the Constitution of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, 97th Congress, 2nd Session, February 1982, printed for the use of the Committee on the Judiciary. The results of using the entire research facilities of the Library of Congress to determine the original basis of the Second Amendment to the Constitution, Fleming explained. The work of some of the best constitutional scholars in the country, the findings of the 79 and 80 Treasury hearings on ATF practices, also some statements from some of the national anti-human rights organizations. For comic relief, I guess, he added. No, I haven't seen it. For sale by the Superintendent of Documents, U.S. Government Printing Office, huh? Henry said as he read what was printed inside the cover of the 175-page book. Guess again, Tom Fleming said with a sardonic smile. They're already out of stock, and get this, they aren't going to print anymore. Think maybe someone on the committee doesn't want the public reading the results of their research? Look at the list of committee members on the next page. Boy, there are some career slime buckets here, aren't there? Henry agreed when he saw the list of names. Then he started thumbing through the contents of the government report. He stopped abruptly on page 20, and his eyes got bigger. They admit those Treasury assholes are out of control, Henry said in astonishment. He started reading aloud from the section on the Treasury hearings that were held 2 and 3 years earlier. At these hearings, evidence was received from experts who had studied the BATF and from officials of the Bureau itself. Based upon these hearings, it is apparent that enforcement tactics made possible by current federal firearms law are constitutionally, legally, and practically reprehensible. Well, that has a nice ring to it, Henry said. He scanned more of the chapter. Bureau's own figures demonstrate that percentages of arrests devoted to felons in possessions and persons knowingly selling to them down to 10% of their cases. Christ, I don't know it was that low. BATF has primarily devoted its firearms enforcement efforts to the apprehension of individuals who lack all criminal intent and knowledge, repeatedly enticed gun collectors into making a small number of sales, then charged them with engaging in the business of dealing in guns without the required license. Law permits a felony conviction where individual has no criminal knowledge or intent. Numerous collectors have been ruined by a felony record. Henry looked up, which is why I've had an FFL since I can remember. He returned to the document. Hey, they even admit that even in cases where prosecutors failed to file criminal charges, agents of the Bureau have generally confiscated the entire collection of the potential defendant upon the ground that he intended to use it in violation of the law. Well, there went the Fifth Amendment, Henry added. Jesus, he said as he read on. Here they document them confiscating a $7,000 shotgun. Probably some palmy dick smoker's purdy, Stokely Meyer threw out. He could not imagine anyone paying that much money for a gun with no rifling in its bore. Henry thumbed through this section, searching for something. I don't see anything in here about them turning Ken Ballou into a vegetable, he said. Then he had a thought. Hey, what happened to that Maryland cop they suckered into going along? The guy that put his round right between Ballou's eyes when 9 feds missed him completely from 10 feet. You mean Simalo? Ballou's family hit him with a civil suit, $2 million, I think. Feds said they'd stick up for him, but when he got to the courtroom and started looking around, he was all by his lonesome. That's one of the worst things about that department. They have just about zero loyalty downwards along the chain of command. They'll hang their guys out in the wind in a minute, and that makes for zero loyalty going up the chain. I talked to Lou last year, Rufus Ingram added. I think if you took every ATF agent and wired them for sound with GI field telephones, it'd be fine with him. For some reason, Henry Bowman paused and thought about Tom Fleming's words for several moments, and took the time to reflect on them. No loyalty up the chain of command, huh? Ought to be able to do something with that someday, he decided. That thought would stick in his mind thereafter, surfacing periodically over the next decade. Henry continued to scan the government report and soon found another item of interest. Says reform is needed right now and some bill, S-1030, will do it. Doesn't give the exact words, but it looks like the gist of it is no such thing as a non-violent gun crime. That bill's DOA, Tom Fleming said with a sneer. Yeah, I can't see that happening. Henry Bowman looked at the table of contents, checked a few pages, then looked again at the book's cover. So our government assigned a committee to research the Second Amendment. They find out it means exactly what we've said all along. They admit their lawyers lied in the Miller case. They admit the adversarial procedure was absent there. He flipped some pages. Jesus, on page 32, they even quote the National Coalition to ban handguns, saying that the Supreme Court has ruled that the right to keep and bear arms exists independently of the Second Amendment, meaning the Bill of Rights is a reminder to the government, not authorization. He thumbed further. They've got great case law in here. Here's a state decision from 1878. If cowardly and dishonorable men sometimes shoot unarmed men with army pistols or guns, the evil must be prevented by the penitentiary and gallows, and not by a general deprivation of constitutional privilege. The more things change, the more they stay the same, Tom Fleming commented. We needed that peckerneck in the Supreme Court in '34, Stokely Meyer said. Henry looked at his three friends. So they did all this research. Tom, what's going to be the upshot of it? Upshot? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's the fox guarding the henhouse. If anyone like us reads it, they just tell us what we already know. It makes us feel good for 5 minutes. If Senator Arnold Ketzenbaum reads it, he'll toss the whole thing in the trash after the first paragraph and sponsor another ban. Fleming grinned as he thought of something. I wonder if his son-in-law, the kid that has the chain of strip mall law offices, I wonder how he did on constitutional law in school and what he thinks of his wife's father. Fleming shook his head and returned to the subject. Anyway, any reform bill that actually gets taken seriously, somebody will probably hang some horrible amendment on it, and the sponsors will agree to the compromise and throw another baby out of the sleigh. Tom Fleming pointed to the government document in Henry's hand. What they're talking about in here is just going to get worse, he shrugged. But take it home and read it anyway. I got it for you. Tom Fleming's prediction about a reform bill was exactly right, as the country would discover in 4 years. His comment about the situation getting worse also proved to be a bullseye.